enrollment opportunities throughout the state, as well as really looking at preschool promise and the future of preschool promise in the next couple of years as we evaluate the last few years, kind of a pilot of preschool promise. So I've been doing that work and also collaborating with Joan's team around QIS and community systems and how we can start to integrate all of our systems together in a really sustainable fashion. And so what I've done now is also taken on the role of managing the Head Start collaboration grant. And so I'll be working with the Head Start more closely in the future, so taking on some of those collaboration responsibilities that Shauna Rodriguez used to hold. But now Gwen will continue to be the Head Start collaboration director, but the program team, so Michael, Lindsay, Dana, myself, we are the Head Start Collaboration Office. So we are an actual office. Well, sometimes we're in an actual office, but we are no longer one person as the office, is what I really meant to say. So I'll be taking that on while also still leading the grant for PPI and also managing pieces of preschool promise. So you'll probably see me in a lot of random meetings, is what I'm gathering from my people. But I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Andy. That's great. We're happy to have you here. Lots of people congratulating in the chat box. Thank you. And okay, so we'll probably hear a little more from you when we talk about coordinated enrollment stuff. And we're going to turn it over to Joan to start us off. And before we do, I'm just going to go ahead and hit the record button here. So give me 1 second.
To begin recording this conference, press 1. To quit, this conference will now be recorded.
All right. Okay, Joan, well, I'll turn it over to you to talk our favorite, not favorite subject about budget stuff.
Yeah. So we thought we'd just start out the meeting by, I know we had a limited amount of time together last week. So it was very nice that Miriam could join, was able to answer some questions and share essentially what we knew good at the time, which is basically still what we know and understand. Just to state the obvious, tomorrow is revenue estimating. So obviously we'll all be getting some additional information. And as we discussed on the last call, that'll tell something, but it's obviously going to take some time to make sense of that information and for all the various making these decisions about what's ultimately going to happen with the state budget going forward to do their part. We're hoping, as we talked about last time, on the 26th, obviously we'll give another update on what we understand, but it's likely going to be early June before we're going to be able to be very definitive. And I think that all of you probably knew that in your gut anyway. Yes, you're all very politically savvy, you're connected, you understand what's going on. There's very, very little, or anything, that we're actually in control of in terms of making decisions about these things. And so we have to let these processes play out. Our goal with all of you, of course, is to tell you what we know and we know it, and we've been doing that and we'll continue to do that. One of the reasons that we have Brett doing some talking and planning with you today around scenario planning is we think there is some important work to do going forward, even if we don't have all the information that we need. And that part of your role as really systems conveners and systems facilitators is to help continue to lead and think about those conversations. Like, we have to imagine that there's a future going forward. It may not look like the one that we've hoped for, but we'd like to certainly are imagining that things will continue to go forward for young children and families, ideally with some of the expansion that we hope for, but that may or may not happen for us. So are there things that we can do kind of in spite of that? So I don't know that there's really anything more to say. I think some of the things that have really stayed with me from the conversation with Miriam, I really appreciated her honesty about the fact that we really are in a custom environment. You know, in particular for KPI, there's been a lot of signaling about that. And so I think just really being realistic about that is a part of leadership, both individually and jointly. And then I think just because there's so many unknowns associated with the expansion, we'll be talking more about that on coordinated enrollment as the call goes forward. But I think part of what we're all being called upon to do is sit in a place where we really wish we knew much more than we do, and then to be able to find those opportunities where we can continue to lead and continue to think about how we help our communities and our stakeholders and our contractors, and most importantly, children and families, childcare providers, all be able to move forward into the world, even though it is a very uncertain exactly what it's going to look like. So I did see that there was at least something in the chat box. We can take a look at that. Michael, I don't think we know yet the legislature is going to meet, Michael. I'm sure that the pundits are basically saying there's probably no way that a special session can't happen, but we haven't been told whether it's going to be a special session one way or the other. But I'm guessing that you're politically savvy and tapped in enough to know that there's a likelihood that the legislature will need to become involved in some way to help to navigate through this crisis. I named early June because it feels to me that almost everything takes several weeks to a month to kind of sort through in these processes. And so when I think about revenue estimating happening this coming week, it just makes sense to me that things are going to be a little bit clearer as we get into early June. But it's not because I have a specific date or additional knowledge that I haven't shared, because that's not what that's based on.
Okay.
Any other questions? Happy to take those throughout, or of course at the end when we have open forum.
Thanks, Joan. All right, I guess we'll go ahead and transition over to Brett to talk about KPI.
All right. So this is really going to follow up on what you all heard last week when Miriam spoke with you, and the framing that Joan just provided in terms of thinking about the scenario planning and doing a little bit of budget planning as well. So let's share a couple tools that we sent out yesterday, but before I do that, I'm just going to give you a little bit of overview. Denise, am I the presenter?
Let me make sure of that, Brett. 1 second. Yes, you are.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to ask you to do as one of our next steps here is to do some scenario planning around KPI budget. And it's really, I know it says KPI budget, but this is really more about thinking about what your P3/kindergarten transition strategy needs to look like, given the reality that we find ourselves living in amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, and what that may mean for families and children as they transition into kindergarten in the fall, whether schools are fully back open or whether it's some kind of a combination of open/distance learning or whatever the case may be. We know that the transition into kindergarten is anxious and fraught time for families under normal circumstances, and that will only be magnified this year. So what we really want to do is think about, and I know many of you are already thinking about it, planning, what does our strategy need to look like to support families and children with this transition, given the current circumstances. So one of the two worksheets, for lack of a better term, that we're going to ask you to follow up on is a Google form that asks you to consider, and I'll show you the form in just a second, what your P3/kindergarten transition strategy would look to envision what it would look like if remaining KPI resources were cut at 25, 50, and 75%. So those may not look too different from one another, but it's sort of the degrees of targeting, specificity, and prioritization that you would make around your broader strategy. And then the last scenario is, what would it look like if KPI funding is eliminated for the remainder of the biennium? And how would you propose to move your P3/kindergarten transition strategy forward absent this funding? What other sources of funding might be available to you? What other programs and partnerships might you tap into, et cetera? So as you're going through this, just some things that I would encourage you to consider are the types of transition supports that families and children will need this year, given the circumstances. What types of activities are viable and what are not. ODE released some guidance last week for how school facilities may be used over the summer for a variety of programs, one of which was what they call bridge programs, and that includes kindergarten transition programs, not exclusive to K-transition, but it includes it. I'll make sure you all have that so that you can see what that guidance looks like. Other funding streams and programs, as I mentioned, and then how to propose activities align with the priority populations and target geographic areas of your DC sector plans. This is what we want to be asking, because regardless of, if the pandemic had never happened, this would still be an important question to be asking ourselves as we move into the next year. So this is the scenario planning component. I'll show you that worksheet in just a moment. And then the next component is budget planning. So one of the things that we need to do is determine the actual KPI expenditures that took place from the beginning of the biennium through June 30th of this year. And because of our reporting cycles and the way that the QRs come in and then the claims that follow those, we're often months behind in terms of what is reflected in EGMs versus what is the reality on the ground. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is fill out a spreadsheet that looks exactly like or very close to the budget section of the KPI report that you do on a quarterly basis. If you have not completed your quarterly report for January to March, I'm going to ask you to include that information as well. If you have, I can pull that information from that report. But at minimum, what I'm looking for is your anticipated KPI expenses during the current reporting period, April through June. And normally we wouldn't have that information from you until August. But given the fact that decisions are going to be made in the very near future, we need this information ASAP. The other pieces of information that I'm going to ask for on this are, if you have subcontractor invoices that have not yet been billed, paid, or claimed in EGMs, we need to know that as well. And then the third piece of info that we're looking for, I'll switch over to this form now. I got it here. So this is the spreadsheet. The third piece of information that we're looking for is getting a really clear understanding of KPI funded FTE. And I know that this is part of the work planning that you all did at the outset, but I'd like to have this all aggregated and all put in the same place so that we can aggregate and roll it up really quickly and easily. So this basically what this section here is in rows 20 through 23 is I am asking for the percent FTE that KPI funds among hub staff, so that's row 21, and then your annual FTE budget allocation out of KPI. So in other words, from July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2021, how much are you planning on spending on staffing, whether that's at the hub or through a subcontractor? So this does not include somebody that you would pay to come in and do a presentation or a workshop or a trainer. This is actual FTE, if that makes sense. here, again, this should look really familiar. This is just copied straight from the QR budget report. Okay. Here in line 16, this is unbilled or unclaimed invoices. That's information that we need. So going back to the conversation last week, the proposed cut KPI was 4.3, which is basically a 50% cut KPI. The people who do the budget work are putting this all together. They assume that because 1 year is 50% of the biennium, that means that 50% of the funding has been spent, 50% remains. But we know that that's not how KPI funding works. So what we're trying to do here is figure out what is the actual spend down of KPI funds through June 30th of this year. And part of the reason for that is if it turns out that it's more than 4.3 million, which I'm guessing it will be, then that may create some opportunities, some flexibility for us, some ways to essentially buy back support for children and families, whether that is something that would have been funded through KPI initially or another type of program. It just gives us a little bit more flexibility than we might have otherwise, should we have to proceed with a full cut KPI program. So this is really about understanding where we are right now so that we can move forward. One of the things that I'm really interested in doing scenario planning is seeing if there are key strategies and concepts and approaches that we can kind of rally around across regions around the state and figure out how we resource and support those in a cut environment and figure out what we can do to support children and families with the kindergarten transition, recognizing that our resource situation is going to be different and not what we anticipated. And, things are very much up in the air now. So with all of that, I just want to show you the Google form. So I think Denise set this up, but this is the Google form. So it's 5 questions. They're all formatted in paragraph format. If you just want to use bullet points, like 8 bullet points are what I'm looking for here. And it's just the scenarios before. So ideally like to have all of this information back by the end of this week. Time is of the essence here so that we can have this information and have it taken into consideration as these decisions are being made. Obviously, once the funding decisions are made and we know what we're working with going forward, we'll come back and do some additional planning, but we want to get this done as quickly as possible so that it can, factor in when decisions do have to get made.
So Brett, there's a question in the chat box about assuming that the school will be commencing again in the fall.
I don't think I think that everybody is hoping that will be the case. And I think, as has been the case over the last couple months, we have to just see how things play out on a week by week and sometimes a day by day basis.
Yeah.
Hey, Brett, that was my question. It's really around mapping out the scenarios. If we're thinking about the scenarios, what that's going to look like, can we use the assumption that school will be open in the fall? That would somewhat change the way that I think about my scenarios if school is going to be online.
I think you should, to the extent possible, I think about both. Certainly schools being open in the fall is the ideal and the best case scenario. If we get there, but I think it would make sense at this stage in the game to consider different possibilities for what school looks like in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's another question, which I'm not sure we can answer, but we'll put it out there. When we know that we need to terminate existing contracts for programs, I'm not asking about staffing contracts, only kinder transition activities and professional development.
you may find you're in a situation where you have a contract in place to do some work that you originally intended to have funded by KPI, and is now using a different solution. So I think we just don't know yet.
Other questions?
Francis? Hi, this is Lisa. I think my question is next is somewhere between Kelly and Beth's. So we have been working with our KPI coordinators in our community to adjust our focus and adjust our work to be more around that family engagement, more around like how are we going to think about that kindergarten transition, and doing less on the PD side, given just our current environment. Are you, as a part of this process, also going to be looking at what and how we're making some of those shifts, and how that's either different than or related to what has been the KPI of last year?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do think that given the circumstances, it makes sense to focus on family engagement, K transition. We know in the best of times that doing shared professional development work that is inclusive of the early care and education sector and elementary school teachers is challenging logistically, and I think that will only be exponentially more so in the current environment. And certainly we want to be directing as much of our time, energy, resources to supporting children and families right now. So, I think that frame makes sense. I think some of what you're getting at, Lisa, really gets addressed in things like grant agreements, revisions, work plans, et cetera, and we're just not there yet. So I think, for the purposes of scenario planning, this is really meant to be kind of a little bit more big picture and help you go through the process of doing some prioritizing. Leave it at that. But not necessarily getting to the level of being super granular right now.
Right.
So, I think some of those questions we'll get to that if we get onto, on the back end of the budget decision and KPI is resourced to some degree for the second year of the biennium, then, those will be questions that we'll ask and answer as part of the grant agreement work planning process. If KPI is not resourced, then we'll need to figure out how do we plan for and support some of these activities that we've identified as essential for supporting the kindergarten transition process. It becomes kind of a different set of questions at that point.
Sure, absolutely. If I could have one follow-up question, is it helpful to the division to see how other initiatives and or funding streams are connected in with the KPI? Is that a helpful thing for you all at this juncture?
Say that again, Lisa.
Is it helpful for you to see how KPI is interrelated with other initiatives and or funding streams at this point?
Potentially, yeah. If as you're going through the scenario planning, if there's space where, you say, we're doing X activity and we see that as being a really nice fit with this other program or this other set of funds, or, if you're doing the scenario planning that, looks at the more severe cuts or elimination, let's say this, X activity is really a priority for us. So if we didn't have access to these funds, we would find a way to do it with these other resources. I don't think it needs to be at this stage anything more complicated than that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Brett, we have a couple questions. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. can we debrief on the scenarios and focus on the funds and then come back with more detailed scenarios of the court cases? Yes. I mean, this is intended to debrief, Molly. Think about it from a standpoint of essentially one paragraph or a handful of bullet points. This is not meant to be, a lengthy narrative by any stretch. The governor's office pushed back on the elimination of KPI, which is likely to be accepted. I assume we made the recommendations, ELD won't be changing the recommendations to fund KPI, so it'll be up to the legislature to refund. I can't speak to that really at all because I am not part of the political process here, really, in any way whatsoever.
Well, not that I'm particularly more, but I can say that in answer to your question, Michael, we haven't pushed back on the cut we proposed, but I don't think it works that way, if you understand what I'm saying. In some ways, it's very ritualized. There's things we do, and then there's certain things that happen as a result of it, and people do other things. So it's not really an exchange. And you are correct that one of the attributes of the process is that there's not a changing of our recommendations. That's not what the next step is. Like what was, as Marion said, is an exercise, and it's really it has rules and ways to carry it out, and we followed through on those things, and now we're waiting for these other parts of the process to either come into play or not. And it would make sense that at some point the legislature would become involved and that they had many more tools at their disposal in terms of being able to have what one might call less blunt instruments, so to speak, to make different levels of decisions than the governor's office actually has.
Great. Okay.
Okay. Do we have any other questions on that?
Looks like Marcy had a question.
Oh. See that, Brett? Is this reduction seen as?
Yeah.
Is this reduction seen?
I mean, I could say it. Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
This is Joan. I could say what we found was actually a pause. Is what we found. We did not say any words like permanently eliminate, discontinue. We essentially said, given this environment, extreme needs of children and families, and our desire to protect, as you'll remember, Preschool Promise and Relief Nurseries completely, we had to make some really difficult decisions, and this was one of them. I have a question. Discuss whenever.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Brett. So I'm just looking at your form, and I'm looking at my version on it on the other screen here, where it's the KPI-funded SPE. If I heard you correctly, for hub and subcontract and the annual SPE allocation, you're asking specifically for the upcoming year of 2021, like what we're anticipating, or do you want us to provide? I think you said the upcoming year, but I just want to clarify exactly what time frame we should put there.
Yeah. I mean, it's really based on your biennial budget, right? So, but because we're halfway through the biennium, basically what I'm trying to figure out is if KPI funding were to remain fully intact, how much of that would be spent on FTE? Okay. So if you want to think about it for the year ahead, based on what your hub has planned, that's a fine way to think about it.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because, and because we got this the other day, so I'm starting to fill out the previous sections about employee salaries and personal services, like January to March above that. I was kind of already tracking that, so I might duplicate the same information if I gave you a biennial amount. You know, should we just specify what it represents and call it good?
on an annual.
Okay, thanks. Brett, this is Christy. A follow-up to that question with the FTE. So you know how my programs are evolving here with KPI. So would that be the FTE associated with each of those programs in all 12 school districts? And many to just use the FTE piece of this, blending their own funding to cover the program costs. It's just easier to report on FTE.
Sure. Yeah. Just roll that all up into a number.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Thanks, Brett. Good conversation, everybody. And I think we are more to come as we work through these exercises. If you need any assistance or have questions, Brett and I are available, so don't hesitate to reach out to us on that piece as well. So, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Anne. And Anne, are you good with me making you the presenter? Oh, John. Okay, John, hold on one second. I'll make you the presenter. Here we go. I think, okay, thank you. Thanks for the clarification, and there we go.
Okay. So certainly, please chime in. Andy is going to be chiming in too. So one of the things that we want to be able to do is talk a little bit about coordinated enrollment, given the reality that we're operating in, which are following from the top last week's call, and it's a financially uncertain environment. So what's on the screen right now are questions that we've received related to coordinated enrollment, and I'd like to really use those to structure a little bit of conversation around coordinated enrollment, and then also the interface with Preschool Promise recruitment, and then to really talk a little bit about what is the work that really can be going forward in this uncertain environment. I think that's a little bit of our theme on this call today is how do we as leaders know when we should slow down or pause or stop work, even if that's for a limited period of time, and then what is the work that should proceed, so that when we do have opportunity, we're able to begin to use that. One of my favorite quotes is that chance favors the prepared mind. And so it's something I always think about in systems work, is that we're much better able to capitalize on things when we've actually spent time getting ready to notice when opportunities present themselves. So these are questions that we've been getting, and we talk about each one of them, and then we can take a pause and see if there's some questions. So this first question came last week in the chat box, and it really was related to what Miriam was talking about, and it basically said, does this change planning for PDG versus funding around coordinated enrollment and other activities? And I think the best answer we can give at this time is we don't know enough yet to know that. So as Miriam said, we're operating in a cuts environment, and we're also facing an uncertain revenue forecast. So as look like, we're going to be able to make decisions about PDG grants and what those funds, how we can best use those funds, and of course that all requires interface with the federal government around making it's our intention to continue to move forward with coordinated enrollment, but the timing of that in terms of what that might look like is really dependent on other things and other information that we don't yet have. So in terms of that answer to the first question, and I think that there's almost no way that the forecast can change what we have planned because it's changed our world. It's changed how we're living every day. It's changed our financial picture in the country. It's changed our financial picture in the state. And so to act as though none of those things are true and not respond to them wouldn't make us very responsible stewards of these resources and support. The second question that was in the same class last week was, what's the plan for coordinated enrollment grants? We're starting the recruitment of a coordinator and we need to know if we should move forward. Were I in your shoes, I would not be moving forward with all deliberate speed to recruit a coordinator at this time. It doesn't mean that we are not going to fund coordinators and we are not going to fund coordinator enrollment, but I think we simply don't know what the scope and scale of the preschool program, Preschool Promise, is going to look like in this next year of the biennium, because we don't know what our revenue is going to look like for TS, and we don't know what the corporate activity tax is going to bring. So we're simply trying to get just a little bit further towards a point at which we'll be able to have a clearer picture of what that's going to look like. And when Marion talked to you last week, she talked about the fact that we're moving forward. All the grants that were submitted for Preschool Promise that were successfully submitted have all been scored through an initial scoring process. The review committees are meeting. I think she said we're going to proceed until we're told to stop, and that is true. But we don't have enough information to say you should fully proceed with hiring because it's simply not clear enough. If you need to know that everything is going to be exactly the same to move forward with hiring, then I would not move forward with hiring because we don't know the answer to that question yet. Within what I think is going to be several weeks, early June is not very far away, and we need to say absolutely yes, move forward, what the picture is going to look like, please proceed with hiring. But at this point, where I choose, we're gaining more information. So the last question, under which I believe there's a lot of people who are very interested in purchasing software and databases. And I would say that at this time, we are not making decisions about coordinated enrollment funds for software or databases, and I don't know when we will make that decision. I can say confidently that we're going to proceed very cautiously with the investment of coordinated enrollment dollars into any software or databases at this time until the financial picture is clearer, until what we understand about the scope and scale of the Preschool Promise program in the next year is going to look like. I understand that it's something that's necessarily coordinated enrollment easier, more expeditious, but as we talked about a lot in the Learning Collaborative when we were focused on preschool, coordinated enrollment for preschool, we said our number one priorities were really around making sure that all the seats were filled. We also talked about how important it is to be engaging with families and other partners and understanding the processes and systems that are already in place in the community before moving forward with solutions like software or databases. And so understanding that some of you are further along in the continuum than others, we are going to proceed very, very cautiously with the funding of any software or databases at this time. So I think it'd be good to pause and see if we have any other questions associated with any of that.
Looks like there's a couple in the chat box, Joan.
Could I speak a bit more on what non-coordinated enrollment process would look like for families wanting to enroll in preschool? Michael, I think you're going to have to
Michael, you still there?
I can't hear
No.
if he's talking.
No, I don't hear anything either. We'll come back. You want to go to the next one, Joan?
Sure. Kelly Poe. Is it possible that you provide software for enrollment in the future? Answer to that question. It's not that we wouldn't be interested in that. I think part of it is a database software is the solution, right? We have to understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve. In some communities, there are different problems that need to be solved than others related to this coordinated enrollment software database. You remember when we were discussing at the Learning Collaborative sort of the different buckets of work associated with coordinated enrollment. There are different software and data solutions for those different buckets. Some address all the buckets, some address only one of the buckets. So multiple, actual, teeing up substitute pools and managing those, and then actually, more like referring, getting children and families connected to things. So some of what I think proceed cautiously is like, what's the actual most important problem that needs to be solved as you're working in your community to help really assure enrollment is coordinated across the various publicly funded early learning programs. To us, it simply feels too soon to be so sure about what the solutions are. Now, obviously, we're open to engaging in further conversation about that, but we're not going to do that until the financial situation is clearer. So we don't have a financial picture of what expansion is going to look like or not. We don't have a picture of what our GF is going to look like, and we don't have a picture of what the corporate activity tax is going to look like. So it is not a time for us to be making decisions about software databases. It is a time, hopefully, for some other things to be happening, which we'll talk about in a minute. But at this time, those decisions, we're not going to make them right now.
Joan, this is Michael Lasher. I figured out how to unmute myself. So if you...
Very good. Go ahead.
So I think I understand from the ELD's perspective the importance of coordinated enrollment and the fact that it's really, part of it is the design, part of the reason that it is important is to make sure that students or children that have been traditionally unserved by the system have a better opportunity to be served. And I guess my question around what does a non-coordinated enrollment process look like for families is really, would you expect that families would go to their nearest preschool promise site that was awarded or already in existence and then just talk with the people that are running that preschool promise site, and which is sort of how it worked in the first iteration of preschool promise? Or is there a different model that you would imagine that families following if there was not money for coordinated enrollment?
I could say confidently that our intention is to have coordinated enrollment that is sized to preschool promise. So if preschool promise stays at service level, we would still need coordinated enrollment for current service level. We are not talking about providers enrolling children. That is not on the table at this time. We are still talking about hubs having responsibility for coordinated enrollment. What you're hearing me try to talk about is we need more financial information to better understand the actual size of the preschool promise program in the future, this coming year, so that we can right-size coordinated enrollment with the size of the program. And it may be that we get to expand just the way we had hoped, and then everyone would get the preschool promise coordinated enrollment funds just about the Learning Collaborative. But the same kind of scenario thinking would be really helpful here in the sense of just anticipating if we're not expand, we don't necessarily need really coordinated enrollment if we're not expanding preschool. Am I making sense? Do people understand what I'm saying? If we stay at current service levels, we only need coordinated enrollment for current service levels with the current hubs that have preschool promise right now. If we expanded outside of that, additional hubs have preschool, then we need more coordinated enrollment. And what I really don't want to do is have anybody on this call think anything other than these are just scenarios. We don't know enough yet. That is why these questions are so hard to answer. I don't want you to be more anxious than any of you already are. We feel this too. We want to make wise decisions about our resources so we're in the best position to support children and families. So these conversations are like us talking to you as our fellow leaders for this work about how do we get the timing right on this? How do we put you in a good position to know who to hire and when to hire them? And we're just asking, we need a little more time to be able to do that.
No, that's very clear. Thank you very much, Jonas. Appreciate you expanding on that.
Hi, this is Dorothy. I have a quick question. As you talk about service levels, and this is less related to the actual funding uncertainty and more related to the adjustments that programs are making because of COVID-19. As applications are being reviewed, the RFA process, is there a lens that is being placed on the number of children that might be placed, or the number of slots approved by application? Is there a lens related to COVID-19? And if we have programs in the fall that essentially have to have smaller class sizes in order to meet guidelines, how does that play into kind of how slots are allocated across programs across the state? Like, is there the potential that we have the same service level, but we actually have more providers because a provider who used to be able to serve 20 kids can only serve 10 given COVID-19 guideline type of things? Or maybe that's just like really off the wall type of question at this point and a lot of unknown, but I've just been thinking about that. Yeah, so I'll just leave that there.
I don't know, Andy, if you want to speak to that at all. Having not been part of the program team meetings, I don't know what you all have been chatting about. So many things, Joe. So many things. Yeah, so I mean, I can give a little bit of an update around that, but the basic answer is that when we know more, we'll be able to do more in terms of planning for the fall. But right now, our directive from the legislation is to go through the RFA process until X amount of slots. We have not been given a direction to reduce that number. However, the process, and Kelly was there yesterday, so Kelly, if I get anything wrong, start waving your hands frantically to stop me, is really that all, for both OPK and Preschool Promise and the Equity Fund and fiscal agents, all the RFAs have come in. Those RFAs are reviewed by two reviewers to be scored. If there's a certain difference in the scores, depending on the RFA part, there's a third reviewer. And then there's a review committee that meets. And so OPK met yesterday. Preschool Promise will be meeting for the next 3 days, full days, because we do have about 270 applications to prioritize. And that's really the committee's role, is to go through and prioritize where we think we need to be looking closer on, what our recommendations may be, and then that goes to Miriam, and it's really up to Miriam to make those funding decisions for the grant awards by June 5th. And so there may be a timing, perfect storm of timing, where we may have a better understanding. Can we fund all of the slots that we went into the process believing that we were going to be able to? We have received enough applications, more applications for more slots than slots that we were already going to fund. or is that timing not going to work out? And that's something that Miriam and Sarah and leadership will be looking closely at that first week in June. As far as how that may then translate in the fall, if we have to have smaller class sizes, I just don't think we're there yet. We don't understand enough about what is going to be required in early learning classrooms in the fall yet, but it's certainly something that I think in the back of our mind as we talk about scenario planning and we talk about how do we prepare ourselves for the chance of that, then it's something that certainly is considered and thought about. I don't know if that's helpful, Dorothy, but that's like all I got right now.
I mean, I knew there was a clear answer there. It is helpful, and it does impact the coordinated enrollment conversations we have in terms of like, you know, how many kids get enrolled into the program, and then what does that actually translate to in terms of programming for the fall, in classroom, out of classroom. I mean, there could be like a whole new model of preschool, school, all over the place from the fall, and so just, you know, kind of knowing that those scenarios are. People are thinking about those scenarios. I know that we're not going to get any solid answers, you know, immediately.
Andy, it looks like there's just a question from Begonia about wondering if, I don't think we have any sense of this. She said, do you have many applications that may appeal their app? Begonia, I think you're going to have to get on and help us understand your question. You'll have to unmute. Okay, 1 second. All right. Brenda, I see you have a question about staff not being reimbursable. I think that we should follow up with you to have a specific conversation. And if others have staff working on coordinated enrollment, I think we can have specific conversations with you. Our intention would not be to cause difficulty in that arena, because of course we're actually hoping that we will only be very briefly paused, as Anne was saying, more like a rest in music, not like a, you know, oh, stop, and never to start again, just more of a brief pause. Are you with us, Begonia? All right.
Yeah. So my question was basically, are you anticipating that you have many of them, some of them wouldn't make it back, we can have, you know, points and what we can.
It was kind of hard to hear, but I think the question is, are we anticipating that there will be many appeals? And that's hard to say because that is completely up to the applicant. So one could say that any application that doesn't get a grant award could appeal, and so it would really then depend on how many grant awards we are able to give out. Remember that different applicants are applying for a different number of slots, and we're looking to fill a total number of slots, and we're also looking very closely at the sector planning and regional and looking at community need and parent preference. So at this point, it would be, I think, very difficult and probably really irresponsible of us to make any assumptions around how many applicants may choose to go through an appeal process after grant awards are awarded, which feels redundant.
Right. So that's a behavior that you cannot predict. But my question was, are there many applications that might not be successful? That was really my question.
I really couldn't speak to that right now. All applications have been reviewed and scored, and we're going to the review committee tomorrow. So that's really all I would be able to say. So, Andy, we did get a question last week about existing. I think, Dorothy, this was your question, that you had some current preschool promise providers who were recruiting families, and you were kind of wondering, like, what to do or what to communicate about that to them. And Andy, I was hoping that you might be able to talk about this a little bit. Yeah, and I think you touched on it a little bit before. I think at this point it would would be helpful to remind providers that we are moving towards the early learning hubs doing recruitment, and I think it gives us, the beat in our music, the rest. I'm not as skilled in music, so this intermission, because I did musical theater, so I don't know the music part, but intermission in our opera epic of coordinated enrollment gives us an opportunity, I think, to reconnect with providers and re-talk about what is coordinated enrollment and what's going to look like and what can that relationship look like. So I would say if you have current preschool promise providers who are recruiting families, for me, if that were me, that would be a great opportunity to connect with those providers and talk again about the current situation, where we're going, and building into those relationships. We've talked a lot today around things that we have zero control over. We have no control over the funding that's going to come down. We have no control over the business tax. We have no control over timing. So what I would encourage us all to do is look for those little things that we can control, such as the relationships with providers, such as taking time to talk with OPK and Head Start grantees and other grant-funded programs in your community and connecting. That's, I think, the silver lining of an intermission is that you get to get up and mingle with your audience and with the folks around you and take some time to kind of build in some intentional relationship building. That is what we can keep doing. So I think that would be my advice, is that it's helpful to remind providers that early learning hubs are going to be taking that on, while also being very honest that we're at a time where we're waiting for more information for some additional clarity. Is that helpful, Dorothy? I think that was your question.
Yeah, and that's the tact I've been taking, is having conversations with providers, having everyone, whether they are a current preschool promise provider or apply to the RFA as an expansion, as a new provider, having them all through the process. In our hub, I think it's helpful to also have that message reinforced, particularly with the current preschool promise providers, reinforced from the early learning division in a more formalized way, as much as you can. And I say that because in some cases, particularly school districts and Head Start, have a way of quickly coming in and trying to consume a process. And I always find myself in a role of, it's great, these two are working together, but we also have this family child care or this child care center, and hubs are building this coordinated enrollment process, and we all need to be part of the conversation. And so I think for me, selfishly, I'm kind of like, I'd like a little bit of backup from the ELD with some of the providers, of reinforcing with them the hubs are going to be in this role. And so I am building relationships, but I think that one way the ELD can be helpful is kind of reminding some preschool promise providers that, like, hey, you have to play nice, don't forget that. It just helps to have a little bit of that external pressure in addition to kind of the work that I'm doing.
Thank you. That's helpful. I appreciate that feedback. Yeah. Okay. So, Anne, I'm wondering if you want to give a little bit on what are the things that would be great for people to know about, that would be great for them and ELD and us to keep on working on together moving forward.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, from what I am hearing both on this call and with individual talk with some of you, a lot of this work is happening now. But just to reinforce, I think what we saw in the Learning Collaborative was just the real importance of bringing partnerships in the region to bear on a shared process and understanding about, embarking on a coordinated enrollment process. So I think, to the extent feasible, I think continuing to engage those partners in your that have done enrollment or are currently enrolling programs, continuing to make those conversations and connections a priority to, acknowledge, understand, and learn from that experience and expertise, and think about ways that is bolstered and built upon in, a more coordinated enrollment process. So I know I've heard many that happening, and I would just encourage, those sort of and strengthening pieces to continue throughout this as we wait to learn more. On the ELD side, internally, we've started a coordinated enrollment work group. One of our first priorities is to update the timeline that we shared with the Learning Collaborative, incorporate some more about our current context and what we are understanding and seeing of what a path forward for coordinated enrollment looks like in some areas, and then also working on the potential for additional competition to support coordinated enrollment, both with ELD and, as we know, more with hubs around some of those facilitated processes and moving towards more understanding and partnerships in the region to support coordinated enrollment. And then finally, internally, we have been working on an outreach toolkit. I think you all will remember we said in May we'd have that finalized. We are close to finalizing, I think, as we're taking this rest to think about, what outreach and marketing really looks like in the current context. We're holding on that, continuing to finalize and take some thoughts about how to incorporate some of what we're learning right now to create a useful tool moving forward. We're hoping that we could have, as we get closer to a draft of this, be able to invite some hub representatives to be a part of a work group that can help us think around outreach and marketing as we know more. So I think we're looking to see if some folks will be interested, and we'll be reaching back out soon to see anyone who might want to join this work group and see where things are. But to be clear there, I think do not expect to see an outreach toolkit finalized from us in the next week or so. I think we will be continuing this work into June to align with what we know more about funding. So Denise, I think that represents what we had wanted to share and provide as an update, and I think we are to the place where if folks have additional questions or thoughts or comments, we're happy to take those. So I think you were going to do a wrap up on supplies maybe before we did that. Yep.
I'm just double checking, nothing else in the chat box here. Great. So yes, I just wanted to let people know that yesterday we closed the portal for emergency supply requests. We're working to finalize the fulfillment of those. If you were not aware, we had the National Guard working with us on that project because it's been quite an endeavor, to say the least. We've fulfilled about 3,300 orders of emergency supplies for emergency providers. And now we're going to try to move towards, with any supplies that are left on the shelves, which we'll have a better idea of by Friday, to try to work with any of the providers that are just coming back online so that we can give some support to those as well. In fact, today, we took care of somebody that had ordered, a couple weeks ago, but they hadn't received their order because they hadn't been approved until after we actually closed the portal. So I think it's encouraging for all of us to know that providers are continuing to come on and continuing to reach back to trying to reopen their businesses. So that's, I think, encouraging for all of us. And if you do get questions in the community, you can just then send those to me as to what our plan is. The second piece of that I think is exciting to share is we did 660 deliveries by county sheriffs across the state for bleach. So we had a special process associated to that ordering form where people could go on and order bleach and have the sheriffs deliver it because it is a hazardous material. So that was pretty cool. We've had some good photographs and some really good pictures in Krista's region. And we're working on an article with our communications department, trying to talk to a couple of those providers to put an article out about the great relationship with our sheriff's departments and our providers. So some cool things that are the silver lining coming out of COVID. As well, a lot of the police departments and sheriffs that went around brought stickers to the kids and things like that. So it turned out to be a really neat opportunity after all. So that's what's happening on that. I just wanted to let you guys know that that was wrapping up, and we are trying to move towards that idea of the reopening of the state and how we're supporting folks as they're coming out of that. So that's what I have for that, unless there's any questions. Let's look at the chat box. Okay. So with that, I think, Joan, we're ready to go to the open forum. If there's folks that have any specific things we didn't get to talk about today, agenda items, I know we're going to meet again for 1 hour on the 26th. I had to look at what day it is here, 19th. So on the 26th, which with the hopes that we have more information to share about the revenue forecast that comes out tomorrow. So we'll do a meeting 1 to 2 p.m. On that date as well. All right. If there's nothing for open forum, we can give you a 15-minute walk for everybody to go outside, take a breath.
It's Dorothy again.
Go ahead, Dorothy.
I'll put something out there. So this is a question for ELD and any of my other hub leaders. The Department of Human Services has several family first implementation work groups that are soon to begin. I was invited to participate in one of the work groups, but the schedule doesn't match up with my work schedule. And I was curious if anyone else is participating in those work groups, or if anyone from the ELD is participating in any of the DHS Family First work groups. I would say that but I'm pretty sure that he's engaged in the work and has been from the beginning.
Yep. Anything else?
Like a couple other folks in the chat box too.
Yeah, I saw a question from Molly about supplies that they're seeing the prices doubled. I know from the procurement side of things, the prices are like unusually high. A couple times I've had to question, like, why are we paying this price for this? So clearly there's some of that going on. And my own personal experience at the grocery store is the same. Things that are not the same price that they were before, based on the supply chain. So supply and demand at its best right now as well. So I don't know how much that's affected, probably by all the states that are competing for all of these products. Beth says the same thing, and it looks like several people are participating in those work groups you mentioned, Dorothy. So thanks for jumping in on that, folks. All right.
Hey, Denise, I have a question on the same line.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, good. Around universally offered home visiting, the Family Connect. I know it's all up in the air in the same way that revenue forecast, general fund, and all of these other things. Like, who knows? But is there? I can't remember who the person at the early learning division is who's liaisoning on that project. Can you help me remember?
Elizabeth Underwood.
Okay, thanks.
If you need a connection to Krista, I can help.
That's okay. I think I'm in touch with her. I just didn't make the connection in the most literal way.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, she's leading our Healthy Families work right now, and so she's the liaison with OHA on
Picks up everything.
Family Connect too.
That's really helpful, and I'm just assuming that effort falls under the same kind of category of we don't know. So.
Yeah, and I think they're trying to understand what their reality is going to look like too, and what their time horizon is going to look like, and in all likelihood, it's probably going to be stretched out much further than they had anticipated in terms of bringing on all the communities in the state. So.
Yeah, especially because the key partners in that work are public health people, and I can barely get 10 minutes Duke University has a really interesting community alignment component, though, just for future reference. Fascinating.
Definitely.
I have a question. This is Beth. Well, a couple things. One is, do you anticipate having to do any kind of scenario planning for different county phases of reopening across the state, knowing that some, I think 34 counties have already gone into phase 1, but there's 5, primarily I think our largest metro areas that are not reopening yet. Do you anticipate any sort of adjustment in planning or movement dependent on that type of thing?
That's a great question. I don't think we know, but I think it would make sense that it could be different. Yes. I mean, from a common sense perspective, I think the counties that aren't in yet are certainly hoping they can get in sooner rather than later. But I think that's important for us to think about. All of us together. It's definitely going to be differences. So.
Yeah. And then my second question is really just around sort of the year-end wrap-up of Preschool Promise. And I know Dana and the whole Preschool Promise team is in the weeds right now with application review. Totally understand all that. I think I'm getting sort of an influx of questions as we sort of get towards June 30 on how to, like, just technicalities around spending down their contracts and how some of the staff FTE are being paid because some people are collecting unemployment or work share, and there's union issues. Like, there's a lot of questions around how to spend down those contracts, and if in some areas they're underspent with their budgets, and can they buy, playground equipment, classroom supplies, and there's a part of me that's kind of like, oh, do we want to just get that money back for next year for kids as opposed to a provider just trying to spend down what they've been allocated? I know that there's been some flexibility around the CQI funding, and just, again, maybe a Dana question I just need to pause on, but it's coming up several times, and I don't feel like I can get her attention just yet. So just wondering, A, if you know anything, that would be great, and B, if not, that's okay too. Just wondering, when do we think that Dana will have a little bit more open capacity given the review process and all of that?
Yeah, I can jump in and speak to that a little bit. Sorry, your last question with Dana having some open capacity, not this week. So next week, where she's in those committee meetings, she's planning for it now, really trying hard to get everything organized so that she does not have to work over a 3-day weekend. I can tell you, I understand, she is struggling to make sure that she's able to reach back out to everybody while also going through this process. So that's one of the reasons why my role can be shifted so that I can help manage the Preschool Promise program. Is because one person was hard enough before there was an additional 270 applicants to go.
Right, absolutely. That's great.
Yeah. So I apologize if you haven't heard back from her. She feels very bad. She wants to be able to get back to people. But she kind of hit the wall at about 1 a.m. and decided to stop. So I know that but I know that we do have a Preschool Promise meeting, I think next Thursday. But if that is not soon enough, what I would suggest at this point is, if you all want to just send me questions, I can do my very best to answer, provide guidance, or at the very least, if there are trends and common questions, maybe we can get some kind of frequently asked questions back to everybody, or know how to really scope next week's meeting so that we just get right down into the information that you guys are really needing, because I know that closeout is an important thing too. So that would be my best suggestion as far as how to move forward at this time, is email me your questions and I will carry them to Dana. or to Gwen or whomever can get us the best accurate information ahead of the meeting next Thursday morning.
Thank you for that, Andy. And again,
Of course.
totally understand where Dana's coming from.
Yeah.
From the file on her, just trying to give a sense of what the workflow is up there.
She's very thankful about the understanding, but also totally understand that there's a lot on you guys too. And so I'm really trying to hopefully pick up some of that so that both sides don't feel that there's these gaps. So while we're all understanding that just how it is this week.
Yep, understood. Thank you.
Thank you for your understanding.
Okay, looks like we have a question in the chat box from Krista. Our community is gearing up for cherry harvest. Are other hubs having discussions about spring harvest and migrant and seasonal farm worker families and program, especially with in time of COVID? Sounds like a
Raise
question.
your hand, maybe, so folks that could see you. Anybody thinking about families, farm workers?
Chris, I can give you a call, but working with our OCDC partners as they're trying to gear up, they're sort of also in the same places too with how do they staff, where are they going to be, and then also with the emergency rules. So lots of different parts and pieces to that. This is Dorothy. I was just going to say our community navigator, Elena, is working with our migrant ed partners right now out of the ESD around putting together some summer kits for families. Actually, it's probably not. Those are going to get distributed sooner this summer. So if you want to connect after this or have me connect Elena with you or whoever on your team, I can do that. I'm my team, so I'll connect with you guys. And also Lisa, thank you so much.
Okay. Anybody else? We've got a couple minutes left.
This is Kelly. I guess I'll add to the farm workers conversation. We've had one of our food processing plants shut down voluntarily. There's one in Idaho and one in Ontario, so they're connected, and the workers go back and forth. And it shut down because there was a family gathering, and as a result of that family gathering, there were so many positive cases that they voluntarily shut down. So I guess if I were to make any kind of recommendation to your families, is to remind them that we're not done with this pandemic. And just because you're gathering together in the fields or in the food processing, we still need to be wearing our masks. We need to be washing our hands. We need to be doing it with our children, but we especially need to be doing it with our workers. And it feels like this is the time to gather, to work together. And we just need to be careful. I'd really like to see an end to this. So it's kind of sad.
Yeah. Very sad. Very hard. Thanks, Kelly.
Okay. Anybody else for the good of the order? Okay. All right, you guys. Grateful to see all of you and wishing you a good week. I know we're going to have some, tough conversations ahead with the forecast tomorrow. So hang in there. We appreciate all you're doing for children and families in Oregon, and thinking of and sending you all good, happy thoughts for the rest of the week. And let's pray for sun. We need some. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.